He knelt in her blood. "Steal from my pocket again, little flame, and at least let me keep the cloth." Dante Salvator's voice was low, calm, terrifying. "Hold still. You're dripping on my floor." Elena Bellini had spent her life mending torn pages in her dead father's bindery, believing broken things could be saved if your hand stayed steady long enough. She had never planned to test that theory on a mafia boss. In 2 minutes, she would disrespect the most feared man in Little Italy by snatching the handkerchief from his suit and using it on someone else. In 2 hours, she would be locked inside his marble house with his war on one side and his silence on the other. What Elena didn't know was that Dante had not knelt for anyone since the night his sister died. What Dante didn't know was that the last secret capable of destroying his empire had been stitched into Elena's life years before he ever saw her. And when that secret surfaced, it would either save them both or bury them where no prayer could reach. The first thing I heard was the rosary, not prayer, not words. Just the soft click of black beads moving through a man's fingers in a room, so quiet even panic seemed afraid to breathe. I stood in the doorway of the back office above Salvator's club with my chest burning from the stares. Men in dark suits lined the walls. Nobody moved. Nobody looked surprised to see blood on the carpet. My brother Paolo was on his knees. Matteo Ferraro, one of Dante Salvator's men, leaned against the desk with his hand pressed to his neck, blood threading between his fingers and down his wrist in quick, bright lines. A shattered whiskey glass glittered across the floor, and in the center of all of it stood Dante. I had heard his name all my life in pieces. "Lower your voice, Elena. Don't take mulberry after midnight." The Salvators collect what they are owed, but nobody ever described the stillness. They talked about violence, never the silence before it. He wore a charcoal suit without a wrinkle in it, white shirt, black tie, no jacket. His sleeves were rolled once, exposing hard forearms and the black rosary wound around one hand. His face was beautiful in the way knives were beautiful, clean, expensive, made for damage. Paolo looked at me and went gray. "Why are you here?" "Because you're an idiot," I said, and then I saw how much blood was on Matteo's cuff. My father had taught me that panic wasted hands. So I did what my body knew before my mind caught up. I walked straight past the most feared man in the room. Every muscle in it seemed to pull tight, but I was already reaching. Dante had folded a white linen handkerchief into the breast pocket of his shirt. I took it without asking. His eyes dropped to my hand. Nobody inhaled. I pressed the cloth against Matteo's wound. "Tilt your head. No, the other way. Unless you want to drown in your own blood, in which case keep doing that." Matteo blinked at me like I was either insane or holy. "Paolo," I snapped, "stop shaking. You're making me nervous." My brother made a broken sound. "Elena, that enough." Dante's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. I looked up then. Really looked at him. His gaze was fixed on me, not angry exactly. More like I had done something incorrect in a language everyone else understood. "You took from me," he said. I swallowed. "You seemed busy." One of the men near the wall made the tiniest sign of the cross. Dante stepped closer. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," I said, because lying felt stupid. "And if you're going to kill my brother, could you at least let me stop your man from bleeding on that rug first? It looks expensive." Paolo actually whimpered. Matteo muttered, "She's got a point about the rug." Dante's eyes stayed on mine. Then very slowly he looked down at the handkerchief in my palm, now ruined with another man's blood. "You went to the wounded man first," he said. "It wasn't a question. I felt my heartbeat in my teeth. He was the one bleeding. And your brother," I glanced at Paolo. His lip was split. His left eye was swelling. He was alive. Matteo might not stay that way if I let up pressure. "My brother can wait 10 seconds. The room changed. I didn't know how to explain it then. Later, I would understand that power could move without noise. That men who had spent years around a dangerous person could feel the shift before it showed on his face. Dante's expression did not soften. If anything, it grew more unreadable. Then Paolo lurched, knocking glass with his knee. I twisted on instinct and a shard sliced across my palm. The pain was white and quick. I hissed and almost lost pressure on Matteo's neck. Before I could correct it, Dante moved. 1 second he was standing over me. The next he was on one knee in front of me. No one in the room breathed at all. He took my wrist. His hand was large, dry, steady. He peeled my fingers open despite the sting, and examined the cut with the concentration of a surgeon or a sinner at confession. "Matteo," he said without looking away from my hand, "someone else can keep you alive for a minute." 2 men rushed forward. Matteo surrendered to them with obvious reluctance. I should have pulled away. I should have been terrified enough to remember self-preservation. Instead, I stared at the dark head bowed over my hand and thought, absurdly, that the floor must be freezing through his trousers. He rewound the ruined handkerchief around my palm with efficient care. Blood bloomed through the white cloth in slow roses. "You disrespected me," he said. I licked my dry lips. I noticed. A very slight breath moved through the room, not laughter. Nobody here would have risked that, but close enough to prove they were still human. Dante tied the cloth off and lifted his eyes to mine. "Careful," he said. "Little flame." The nickname landed cold. Not affectionate, not kind. A way of identifying the thing that might burn him if he touched it wrong. Paolo found his voice. "Please, she had nothing to do with this." "I know," Dante said. That scared me more than anything so far. He rose in one smooth motion and looked at my brother. "What did you take, Paolo?" Paolo's mouth trembled. "I only meant to sell 1 page." I didn't know what it was. "From where?" "The firebox in the archive room downstairs," Vittorio said. He stopped. Dante went still in a way that made the men around him look down immediately. "What did Vittorio say?" he asked. Paolo cried then. Actual tears. I hated him for it a little. I hated myself more for understanding. That it was old paper nobody used. That one collector would pay enough to clear the bindery taxes. I just wanted to help Elena keep the shop. My stomach dropped. The bindery. The debt notice waiting in my desk drawer. The landlord's final warning. Paolo seeing more than I thought he did. Dante looked at me. "Bellini bindery." I nodded once. His eyes sharpened. "You repair paper?" "Yes." "Burn damage?" "Yes." He turned to the desk and lifted something wrapped in blackened cloth. When he opened it, the smell of smoke and old leather breathed into the room. Inside lay a half-burned ledger, its spine cracked, pages fused at the edges. I forgot where I was for one dangerous second. I forgot the guns, the blood, my brother on his knees. "That should be flat," I said before I could stop myself. "If you keep it upright like that, the ash will shear the margins." Silence. Then Dante said, "Take her with me." Paolo made a broken sound. "No, I'm not finished with you," Dante told him. "Be grateful your sister walked in before I was." My blood went cold. "Where are you taking me?" "To fix what your brother damaged." "I'm not going anywhere with you." His gaze moved to the bandage on my palm. "You already did." He took the ledger. One of his men grabbed Paolo. Another opened the office door. I should have screamed, fought, run. Instead, I stood there with his bloodied handkerchief around my hand, and the soft click of black rosary beads following me out of the room. When the car door shut, I understood something simple and final. My old life had just closed behind me. Dante Salvator's house was not a house. It was a controlled climate for fear. The gates opened without sound. Gravel whispered under the tires. The villa rose out of the dark like something built to outlive tenderness. White stone, black windows, iron balconies, too much space between lit rooms. Inside, the marble floors held the cold the way old churches did. Even the air smelled expensive and restrained. Wax, cedar, faint smoke. and underneath it the cleaner scent of night air carried in on men's coats. I was shown to a bedroom larger than the apartment over the bindery, where Paolo and I had grown up. There was a fireplace I didn't trust, silk curtains I hated on principle, and a lock on the outside of the door that clicked with professional confidence. I learned that last detail when I tried the handle. It opens from your side if I tell it to. I turned. Dante stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, black tie gone, holster visible under his arm. He looked less like a businessman now, and more like the thing everyone whispered he was. "You lock women in rooms often?" I asked. "Only the ones who steal from me." "I stole a handkerchief. You stole peace from my evening," I should have answered. Instead, I became aware of my hand, newly cleaned and wrapped in a proper bandage, and of how close he was to the bed without seeming to cross the room at all. He glanced at the writing desk by the window. The burned ledger sat there beside a tray of distilled water, soft brushes, weights, blotting paper, tweezers. Better materials than I kept in my own shop. Someone had listened when I listed what I needed on the drive over. "That was fast," I said. "You said what you needed. That doesn't mean I expected to get it." His gaze rested on me for one unreadable second too long. "That is because you don't know me." I almost said lucky me, but there was a difference between defiant and stupid, and I was beginning to understand where that line lived. "How long," I asked instead, "until you restore enough to tell me who set the archive fire? So I'm a hostage. You are useful. That's not better." His mouth moved very slightly, not a smile. "The memory of one maybe, or the threat of it." A knock sounded, followed by a man carrying a tray so large it looked ceremonial. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and already frowning at the bread basket on the tray, as if it had insulted his religion. "This," he announced to no one and everyone, "is attempted murder by focaccia." Dante didn't look away from me. "Gianni, I'm serious, boss, doctor. Russo said if I break the diet again, my arteries will file for divorce." He set the tray down and noticed me properly. "Ah, the famous handkerchief thief." "I'm not famous," I said, "in this house." "Signorina, you're practically folklore," Dante said. "Leave the food." Gianni sighed the sigh of a man persecuted by carbohydrates and romance. Bianca had roasted potatoes made. Roasted potatoes. That woman is either testing my willpower or trying to bury me in a handsome suit. He caught me looking and offered his hand. "Gianni Rizzo, head of security, martyr. Unappreciated athlete." "You're limping," I said. "Emotional injury. I saw a pigeon in the courtyard." I stared at him. He leaned closer in confidence. "Flying rats, no honor. No boundaries." Despite myself, a laugh escaped me. Dante's eyes flicked to my mouth, just once, but I felt it. Gianni noticed everything. "Excellent," he said. "A witness. When Bianca tells people I'm dramatic, you can testify I faced the bird like a man." "She was cooing at the fountain," came a cool female voice from the hall. "You hid behind a statue of Saint Michael." A woman in black trousers and a cream blouse entered carrying a medical bag. Dr. Bianca Russo, early 30s, sharp cheekbones, sharper eyes. She had the kind of stillness that came from having seen people open on operating tables and deciding not to waste language after that. Gianni straightened. "Doctor, security chief." Their eyes met for 1 second. Entire subplots passed between them. She moved to me. "Let me see the hand." I held it out. She unwrapped the bandage, inspected the cut, then glanced at Dante. "Not deep. She'll keep the hand. Congratulations." "Was that in doubt?" I asked. "In this house. I like to stay current." Dante ignored both of us. "She works. She doesn't leave this wing without permission. Her phone stays with Gianni." "My phone?" I said. "Absolutely not." He looked at me. "You can call the landlord in the morning. You can tell him Bellini Bindery's taxes are paid." The room went very still. I hated that the first thing I felt was relief. "The taxes," I said carefully. Paid by you? Yes. I didn't ask you to. No, your brother tried theft instead. I stood so quickly the chair scraped marble. Then send the money back. Why? Because I won't owe you. Dante took one step into the room. That was all. One step and suddenly the air had edges. You already do, he said. My throat tightened. I wanted to throw something. Cry maybe. Neither felt survivable in front of him. Bianca rewrapped my hand and spoke without looking up. If you plan to keep her alive, Dante, don't corner her before she eats. Low blood sugar makes people irrational. Gianni muttered, can confirm. I licked olive oil off my own wrist at noon. Bianca didn't even blink. Humiliating. He put a hand over his heart. Cruelty from the woman I hope to marry. I looked between them, startled into another almost laugh. The darkness in the room eased by 1 inch. Dante noticed that too. He noticed too much. When Bianca and Gianni left, he stayed. You should eat, he said. I'm not hungry. That isn't true. No, I said softly. It's not. He moved to the desk and laid the blackened ledger flat carefully this time. Learning or listening, that was somehow worse. Tomorrow, he said, you tell me what survived the fire. And then we see what your brother's stupidity cost. You mean what you decide it cost. His hand settled on the ledger. Long fingers splayed over ruin. In my world, little flame, that is the same thing. He turned to go. I looked at the locked door, the tray of untouched food, the tools laid out like obedience, and the man who had paid my taxes without asking if I wanted my life saved that way. Dante, he paused. I hated how steady his back was, how impossible he looked to move. What happens if I refuse to help you? He half-turned. You won't. Why are you so sure? His eyes dropped to my bandaged hand. Because you went to the wounded man first, he said. People like you always touch the broken thing. Then he left me in a room that could open only if he allowed it. Paper had moods. That was one of the first things my father ever taught me. Healthy paper flexed. Sick paper crackled. Burned paper lied by pretending it would survive one more touch than it actually could. By noon the next day, I had forgotten twice that I was technically a captive, and once that the man who entered the library without sound could order someone buried before dinner. The Salvator Library occupied the east wing and smelled like calfskin, dust, and money that had been old for generations. Tall windows let in winter light the color of steel. Dante had given me the long restoration table, bright lamps, magnification, humidity domes, even Japanese tissue fine enough to disappear into a seam. It should have flattered me. Instead, it made me uneasy how thoroughly he had anticipated my needs. I worked in gloves, lifting curled corners a millimeter at a time. Some pages were too far gone. Others held if I breathed carefully enough. You talk to it, Dante said. I nearly dropped my micro spatula. You shouldn't appear like that. You were saying something. I looked down at the ledger. I said don't fight me. To the book. Yes. He stood at the far end of the table, jacket on today, watch silver at his wrist, gun invisible but certainly present. Does it listen? Sometimes. That is more than most men do. I tried not to smile and failed a little. His eyes narrowed on it as though he had caught me handling contraband. Did Paolo mean what he said? I asked. About Vittorio telling him the page was worthless. He said it. That isn't an answer. It is the only one I have. I lifted a charred sheet with 2 supports. Black flakes fell like dry snow. Dante's hand shot out, steadying the tray before it could tip. He did not touch me, only the metal edge near my wrist, but heat moved through me anyway because I had noticed how carefully he chose not to. That made 3 times now. The bandage in the club. The door frame in my room. This, almost. I hated that I had a name for it. By mid-afternoon I had separated 6 pages. One had accounting columns. Another had shipping manifests under shell company names. The third held only half a sentence and part of a signature. My pulse jumped. What is it? Dante asked. I slid the page under magnification. Could be Vitelli, could be Vittorio, could be vitamin if your criminal empire is very health conscious. His gaze sharpened. Show me. He came around the table and stood behind me. That should not have mattered. It did. His body heat reached me before he touched the back of my chair to lean in. The smell of him was colder than cologne alone. Cedar, leather, winter air, and something metallic underneath, as if darkness itself had a temperature and followed him indoors. My hand stopped being reliable. There, I said, pointing too quickly. The downstroke, the pressure mark, same ink line. Whoever wrote this had a heavy hand. Dante bent lower. His shoulder almost brushed mine. Vitelli. I looked up at the same time he did. We were too close. His gaze dropped once briefly to my mouth, and a second later the library door opened. Gianni strode in holding a phone and an expression of great offense. Bad news, worse news, catastrophic news. The catastrophic part is a pigeon got into garage 3 and I almost died. Dante didn't move away from me right away. And the actual bad news, Gianni paused, registering the distance between our faces. His eyebrows made a reckless climb. Interrupting scholarship, my favorite. Gianni. Right. The bindery storefront was watched this morning. 2 Vitelli men, they left after an hour. Ice slid into my spine. The shop. We moved them along, Dante said. You what? We moved them, he repeated, meaning no more questions, meaning probably blood. I set the spatula down because my fingers had started to shake. They know about Paolo. They know something, Dante said. Not enough yet. I looked at the half-restored page, the ink crawling back from fire, the name emerging like a threat from underwater. My father used to say fire never destroys selectively, I murmured. It takes what it can and leaves what hurts. Dante's gaze shifted to me, unreadable again. Your father taught you this work? Yes. Was he good? He could mend a page so perfectly priests would thank God instead of him. I swallowed. He died 5 years ago. No sympathy crossed Dante's face, no easy softness. Somehow that made what he asked next feel more honest. How? Smoke inhalation. Electrical fire in the back room. His jaw changed, just slightly. If I hadn't been watching him so hard, I would have missed it. He left me the bindery, I said, and debts hidden in drawers. Very romantic. Gianni, who had gone strangely quiet, cleared his throat. For the record, I think paper restoration is extremely romantic. If Bianca ever lets me court her properly, I plan to write daily poems. Dante said, You haven't read a poem since school. That is why they'll be bad. Women enjoy effort. Women enjoy competence, came Bianca's voice from the hall. Gianni straightened like someone had pulled a string through his spine. Doctor. I was just explaining my emotional depth. I advise against it, Bianca said, stepping in with Matteo at her side, his neck stitched and his expression irritated by survival. Matteo gave me a respectful nod. You saved me yesterday, he said. I felt awkward immediately. I pressed a handkerchief. You did it before asking who I was. His eyes flicked once to Dante. That matters. The room went quiet in a different way this time. I looked back at the burned page. Dante said, Finish that sheet. Then we talk downstairs. He left before I could ask about what. As the door shut, Gianni muttered, When the boss says we talk downstairs, it means nobody will enjoy the architecture. I should have laughed. Instead, I stared at the half-visible name on the page and realized something worse than fear. Someone had not only burned the archive. Someone inside Dante's world had known exactly which page to destroy. The chapel on the Salvetor estate had been built for appearances and kept for ghosts. It sat beyond the main house under a stand of bare cypress trees, all pale stone and stained glass gone darker with age. The air inside smelled of wax, damp stone, and old incense. When Dante told me the surviving archive boxes had been moved beneath it years ago, I understood immediately why. Men like him hid their worst truths closest to God. "Why here?" I asked as he unlocked the iron gate to the undercroft. "Because nobody steals from places they're afraid to desecrate." I looked at him. "That seems optimistic." He glanced back. "Not everyone has your nerve, little flame." The nickname no longer felt like a warning alone. That should have bothered me more than it did. Below the chapel, the undercroft was cool enough to bite. Metal shelves held crates of ledgers, deed books, donation records, contracts. Old money loved paper. Old crime needed it. I crouched beside a smoke-damaged archive box while Dante stood watch, phone dark in his hand, rosary beads slipping one by one under his thumb. Click, click, click. "Do you ever stop doing that?" I asked. "The rosary?" "Yes." "No." I found myself watching his hand. "Why?" A long pause, then "My sister carried it." I looked up. He had never offered me anything personal before, not even by accident. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. His face closed at once. Too late. I had seen the seam before it sealed. I turned back to the box because sometimes mercy meant pretending not to notice pain when someone handed it to you badly. The floor near the back shelf glittered. Broken votive glass. I shifted to reach a ledger and felt a sharp slice across the arch of my bare foot through the thin sole of my house slipper. I hissed and sat back hard. Dante was beside me immediately. "What happened?" "Glass." "Don't move," he crouched. No hesitation, no performance, just that dangerous, efficient stillness narrowing to one task. He lifted my ankle into his palm and set my heel against his thigh. The position was intimate enough to steal the air from my lungs. "It's small," I said. "That isn't the standard for concern." His fingers were warm. Mine curled uselessly into my skirt. He removed the shard with clean precision. A bright bead of blood welled up. "You should keep your shoes on in rooms where men hide sins," he said. I almost laughed, except his thumb swept once over the inside of my ankle to check for more glass, and the contact traveled through me in a way that felt humiliatingly alive. He felt it too. I knew because his hand stilled, almost. Then footsteps thundered overhead and the spell broke. Gianni's voice carried down the stairwell. "Boss, I'd like it recorded that I object to violence during my fasting window." Dante let my foot go. The loss of his hand was ridiculous and immediate. Gianni appeared at the gate with Bianca behind him, and a paper bag folded under his arm like contraband. "I bring updates and deep suffering." Bianca looked at my foot, then at Dante kneeling on the stone floor in front of me. Her brows lifted one unhelpful millimeter. "Should I leave you two to the saints?" "No," Dante said. Gianni whispered to me loudly, "I'm never recovering from this." "What's the update?" Dante asked. Gianni sobered. "Your accountant in Hoboken is missing, so is Vittorio." Dante rose very slowly. "Since when?" "Since before dawn." Cold moved through me. Paolo's trembling voice in the club came back with vicious clarity. "Vittorio said," Bianca crouched and wrapped my foot while the men spoke in low, tight voices. "He'll tell you only what he has to," she said without looking up. "Who?" "Dante." I noticed. She tied off the bandage. Then noticed something else. He doesn't waste motion. "If he brought you here, it wasn't only because you can restore paper." I stared at her. "Then why?" Bianca sat back on her heels. "Ask him." So I did. When Gianni and Bianca moved ahead to inspect the far shelves, I stayed by the stone altar at the rear of the undercroft and watched Dante study a locked cash box blackened by smoke. "Why me?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then he set the box down and said, 5 years ago, there was a fire in an archive room over a chapel in Brooklyn." My skin went cold. "My father, he knew my father before he knew me. My father," Dante said, "died in the same fire that took my sister." For a second the undercroft lost all sound. Not silence, something worse. The kind of stillness that happened when the world rearranged itself and your body had not yet agreed to live in it. I stared at him. No, his face did not change. Yes. Bianca and Gianni had gone very quiet behind us, like they understood instinctively that they had stepped into a room made of old grief and should not breathe too hard inside it. You said electrical fire, I whispered. That's what the papers said, Dante replied. That is what happened. My heart began to knock against my ribs in quick, ugly blows. Then what happened? Dante looked down at the blackened cash box in his hand, then back at me. The rosary clicked once between his fingers. Marco Vitelli was moving money through parish accounts, he said. Donations, shell shipments, medicine diverted before it ever reached the clinics it had been promised to. My sister needed insulin. The pharmacy that carried it was already paid to delay certain customers, poor ones, the ones who didn't matter. His jaw locked. Us. I could see it too easily. 19-year-old Dante on a dirty floor, begging, men making him kneel because they could. She collapsed before dawn, he said. I carried her to St. Bartholomew's because the parish kept emergency supplies for the clinic. Your father was there working late on restoration. He tried to help. So did the priest. A beat. Then the fire started. My throat hurt. And my father went back in when the smoke dropped the room to black. Dante's voice had gone flatter, colder. That meant the feeling underneath it was unbearable. He heard Chiara coughing near the chapel floor. He found her before I did. I pressed a hand to my mouth. He got her to the aisle, Dante said. He got her farther than anyone else could have, but the smoke, he stopped. Not because he had nothing more to say, because saying it cost him. Bianca looked away. I swallowed hard enough to hurt. Why didn't you tell me? Because Bellini was already in my house, and I didn't yet know if Bellini meant rescue or ruin. That landed where it should have, in the bruise. You thought I had something to do with it. I thought your father might have seen something before he died. I thought Marco might have spent years looking for whatever it was. Dante's gaze held mine. And when Paolo stole that page, I knew I was right. I looked at the smoke-black shelves, the old ledgers, the stone altar. And suddenly, the whole undercroft felt like a body that had kept a bullet inside it for years. The prayer book, I said. Dante went still. I didn't know how I knew until I did. My father had always kept private repair notes separate from customer orders, not for the clients, for himself. Small records of damage patterns, odd requests, anything that felt wrong. When I was 13, I had found one entry in his cramped hand and asked why he wrote as if books lied. Because sometimes they do, Elena. Your father was repairing a Whitechapel prayer book that month, Dante said slowly. Hand-tooled leather, silver clasp. He signed for it himself. My pulse jumped. At the bindery, yes. And if he found something inside it, he may have hidden it where only another conservator would think to look, Gianni exhaled. Well, that's the worst possible excellent news. Bianca gave him a look, a remarkable sentence. I barely heard them. My father had died in Dante's tragedy before Dante had ever stepped into mine. The man I had been trying not to fear was tied to my life by smoke, paper, and a chapel floor. I looked at him. So when you heard my name in that office, I remembered a man with ash on his face holding my sister like she still had time. Everything inside me broke open a little, not cleanly. Nothing so merciful. Dante took one step closer. Elena. His voice did something dangerous to my name, made it sound less like an order than a fact he had already decided to keep. We go to the bindery tonight, he said. I should have argued, should have told him I was not one of his men to direct. Instead I asked, and if my father hid what Marco wants? Dante's eyes went colder than winter glass. Then, he said, Marco dies for making him need to. My father stitched a war into leather. We went after midnight. Dante did not ask whether I was afraid. That was one of the unnerving things about him. He never insulted fear by pretending it wasn't in the room. He simply walked forward as if terror was a weather condition and not a reason to stop. The bindery waited on Broom Street with its shutters down and its windows dark. My chest tightened the moment I saw it. The narrow upstairs windows, the old brass sign. The warped frame my father always meant to fix and never did. Home, with danger standing outside it. Gianni checked the alley first, muttering about pigeons conducting surveillance for Vitelli. Matteo went to the rear entrance. Bianca stayed with me at the curb for exactly 2 seconds before saying, "If anyone shoots at you, aim low and run crooked." Comforting, I said. "I'm a doctor, not a poet," Gianni looked offended. "I am both in spirit." "Spirit does not count," Bianca said. Dante unlocked the front door himself. That mattered more than it should have. Inside, the bindery smelled like paste, dust, linen thread, and the dry sweetness of paper gone old with dignity. The work tables sat where I had left them. My father's lying press crouched in the corner like some patient animal waiting to be used again. For one brief, savage second, I forgot every gun in the room and wanted only to cry. Dante saw it. Of course he did. He did not touch me. He just said quietly, "Show me where he kept his private records." I led him to the back room. My father had hidden his more important notes where no thief would bother looking. Inside, ugly things. Tax ledgers, torn hymnals, moth-eaten delivery logs. I pulled down a cracked bookkeeping volume from the top shelf, shook loose the wrapped oilcloth packet from inside, and sat at the workbench with hands that did not feel entirely mine. The packet held repair notes, customer invoices, pigment orders, and one narrow journal. I knew it at once. Brown paper cover, blue thread at the spine, his hand. My throat tightened. Dante stood at my shoulder while I opened it. June entries, water damage, foxing, guilt loss. Then Whitechapel book, spine previously cut and resewn by unskilled hand. Weight inconsistent with text block. Client asked no questions. I did. The room snapped smaller. I turned the page. If I am right, this belongs nowhere near a church. Returning tomorrow after the child is seen. If the men from Mulberry come first, do not trust the old one with kind eyes. Wolves age 2. My pulse staggered. Gianni swore softly. Matteo went still as stone. The old one, I said. Dante did not move at all. That was worse. Vittorio, Matteo said. Nobody contradicted him. I kept reading. Hid contents where fire will not take it quickly. Prayer book remains safest if no one knows it carries a second spine. Tell Elena never to force dry leather. Warmth first. Always warmth. My vision blurred for one terrible second. Dante bent and braced one hand on the table beside mine. Not touching. Close enough that I felt the restraint in it like heat. "Where is the book?" he asked. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my good hand. If he finished the repair, it would be shelved with completed private commissions. Would he label it plainly? "My father," I gave a broken laugh. "Absolutely not." We searched. High shelves. Flat files. The locked cabinet under the window. Old prayer books, missals, family Bibles, 2 account books disguised as devotional texts. My heartbeat kept time with every second. Then I saw it. A white leather volume tucked sideways behind a stack of folios, almost hidden by accident, which meant my father had hidden it on purpose. I reached for it. Dante caught my wrist. "Wait." His voice was low, pure instinct. He took the book from the shelf and handed it to Matteo, who checked the cover, clasp, hinges, page edges. No wire, no blade, no trap. Only then did Dante give it back to me. The leather was dry, cool, familiar. My father's repair was there if you knew where to look. A seam too elegant for factory work. New thread tinted to old cream, the slightest swell at the spine. "There," I whispered. I took it to the table. My tools were still in the top drawer, bone folder, lifting knife, fine awl. Dante watched my hands as I softened the paste seam with controlled breath and a little warmth from the lamp. "People like you always touch the broken thing," he had said. What he had not understood then was that sometimes the broken thing touched back. The inner spine lifted in one careful strip. Inside was not cash, not jewels, paper, thin, folded, oil-wrapped paper. Of course it was. I opened the packet and saw ledger copies, port numbers, payoff initials. Clinic shipments rerouted under Marco Vitelli's seal, and one signed authorization from the pharmacy that had delayed Chiara's insulin. Dante made no sound at all. That scared me more than rage. At the bottom lay one last note in my father's hand. If Dante Salvator survives long enough to become dangerous, give him this only if he has learned the difference between power and cruelty. I looked up. Dante was staring at the page as if it had put a knife between his ribs and turned it gently. What did he mean? I asked. His eyes came to mine. I don't know, he said, but he did. And the fact that he did not lie about lying made it worse. He kissed me like a man unlearning violence. We left the bindery before dawn. Dante moved us like a military operation. Matteo took copies. Gianni rerouted the cars twice. Bianca threatened to sedate anyone who bled in her direction before sunrise. By the time the gates closed behind us at the estate, I had not slept in almost 24 hours and was holding enough dead men's secrets to start a second war. Dante took me not to the library, not to the locked bedroom, but to his private study. That was new. The room was all dark wood, low lamp light, and a bar cart nobody touched. One wall held books that had actually been read. Another held nothing at all except a crucifix and the shadow beneath it. He shut the door. I set the prayer book on his desk between us. You knew, not all of it. You knew my father tried to save Chiara. Yes, you knew Vittorio might be involved. His jaw tightened. I suspected, and you still brought me into this house without telling me my life had already been stitched into yours years before I ever saw you. Yes, the bluntness of it nearly knocked the air out of me. Do you enjoy making honesty sound like a crime? I asked. I don't have to make it sound like anything. I laughed once without humor. Unbelievable. He took a step closer. Elena, no, I backed away from the desk. No, you do not get to say my name in that voice and expect me to forget that I have been moving through your secrets blind. That was never my intention. Then what was? His expression changed. Not softened, not broken, just stripped of one layer, to keep you alive. I hated how quickly that landed. By locking me in rooms, if necessary, by paying my debts, yes, by deciding for me. Something flashed in his eyes then, the thing beneath the stillness. The thing that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Yes, he said more roughly, because every hour you remained ignorant, you remained alive. I should have been afraid. Instead, I was furious enough to step closer. You don't own survival, I said. You don't get to appoint yourself the god of who knows what. No, he said. But I am very good at deciding who lives long enough to be angry with me. The room went tight. I was close enough now to see the exhaustion at the edge of him, the old damage. The discipline holding everything upright. He looked immaculate the way buildings looked intact after a fire had only burned the inside. My father wrote that note for you, I said more quietly. The difference between power and cruelty. Dante looked at the prayer book. He had no reason to believe I would learn it. Did you? His gaze lifted to mine. I'm trying. That did it. Not the threat, not the authority, not the black suit or the gun or the fact that he could probably have half the city brought to heel with one phone call. Trying. I went still. He noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed the exact second the room changed. What are you doing? He asked. Making a mistake. Then I kissed him. I expected violence, heat, possession. Something sharp and punishing. What I got was stillness first, the shock of him not moving at all. Then Dante made a sound low in his throat, one I felt more than heard, and his hand came up to my face with devastating care. He kissed me back like a man unlearning something ugly by force. Slow at first, reverent in a way that should not have belonged to someone like him and did anyway. The second kiss was deeper, the third not deep enough. By then my hand had found his tie, his collar, the hard line of him under perfect fabric, and he was holding my waist as if restraint were the only thing standing between us and ruin. He broke away first, barely. His forehead rested against mine, his breath was uneven. "Elena," my name again, not an order, a warning, a prayer said badly. "If you keep looking at me like that," I whispered, "I'll assume the problem is not one-sided." His mouth moved against mine once, almost a smile. "Little flame," he said softly, "the problem is catastrophic." A knock hit the door, we froze. Gianni's voice came through the wood. "Before I interrupt something formative, I need everyone to know Bianca just agreed to coffee if I survive the week." Bianca, farther away, said. "I agreed to discuss coffee." Gianni lowered his voice theatrically. "Which is basically a proposal." Dante closed his eyes once. I laughed into his mouth before I could stop myself. When he stepped back, he looked dangerous again, but not untouched. And that was somehow more terrifying. Then he opened the door and took the war back into his hands. Betrayal wore a familiar face. Vittorio Scali returned at noon. He did not sneak in. That was the most insulting part. He arrived through the front doors of the estate as if he belonged there, in a camel overcoat and dark gloves, silver at his temples, sorrow arranged carefully over his face. I had seen men like him before in church vestibules and funeral homes, the ones who looked gentle because they had spent their whole lives learning how to soften the knife. Dante met him in the East Salon. I watched from the doorway because nobody had told me to leave, and I was done obeying the shape of fear. Vittorio looked at Dante first, then at me. His smile deepened with counterfeit regret. "So this is Emilio Bellini's daughter." Every hair on my arms lifted. "You knew my father." I knew a stubborn craftsman with more conscience than was healthy. His gaze drifted to the bandage on my hand. "You have his eyes." "Don't," Dante said, one word. Enough to draw blood from the room. Vittorio sighed. "You've already decided. You sent Paolo into my archive. I sent a desperate boy toward a useless page. Marco's men turned that into theater. You watched the bindery, a precaution. You murdered the accountant in Hoboken." A pause. Then Vittorio smiled very slightly and Dante had his answer. The next few seconds moved with horrifying clarity. Matteo reached for his gun. Gianni shifted left. Dante did neither. He simply stood there with a stillness so complete it made everyone else look frantic by comparison. "Why?" Dante asked. That, more than anger, opened something in Vittorio's face. "Because I taught you to survive," he said, "and then you became sentimental." Dante's eyes went flat. Vittorio gestured toward me. "Her, the bindery girl, the doctor. The wounded strays you insist on feeding. You are forgetting what keeps men like us alive." "Not kneeling to worse men?" Dante asked softly. Vittorio's expression flickered. He knew the old wound. He had probably built part of himself inside it. "No," Vittorio said, "understanding that mercy is a door someone else uses first." I finally spoke. "And Chiara?" Vittorio looked at me with genuine annoyance as if I had interrupted business with a moral fact. "An unfortunate consequence." Dante moved. I had seen speed before. This was not speed. This was inevitability with muscles. He crossed the room, caught Vittorio by the throat, and slammed him into the paneling hard enough to rattle the glass. The guards raised weapons, and then froze because Dante did not need theirs. "Say her name again," Dante said almost gently, "and I'll remove yours from every record in the city." Vittorio actually smiled through the choke of Dante's grip. "There he is," he rasped. "The boy I made." Dante's hand tightened. And that was when the shot came from outside. Glass exploded inward. The room shattered into movement. Someone screamed. Gianni fired toward the terrace. Matteo dragged me down behind the sofa. Bianca, from somewhere impossibly calm, shouted instructions nobody sensible ignored. "Marco's men," Gianni barked. "Of course." Vittorio twisted free in the chaos with an old man's deception and a young killer's timing. By the time Dante turned back, the terrace doors stood open and one of the outer guards was down. "Get Alina out," Dante snapped. "No," I said instantly. He looked at me once. There were whole wars in that look. Then he crossed the room, gripped the back of my neck and bent close enough that only I heard him. "If he takes you," he said, "I burn the city to get you back." Before I could answer, he was gone. Gunfire cracked across marble and glass. Men shouted. Matteo shoved me toward the interior hall. Gianni covered the corridor, muttering dark things about traitors, snipers, and cardio. Bianca grabbed my arm. "Move." We ran. Halfway to the rear stairwell, I realized something cold and final. Marco had not come for Dante, he had come for the prayer book. And Vittorio had just opened the gates. Marco liked God better when God was locked up. They took me at dusk, not from the estate, from the bindery. I knew it was a trap before I stepped inside and walked in anyway. That was the sort of decision people would call stupid if they had never loved anyone reckless enough to make them brave in bad directions. Paolo had sent word through one of the neighborhood boys, "Please come alone. I'm sorry, they have me." Bianca would have called it textbook bait. Gianni would have called it catastrophically suspicious. Dante would have called it forbidden in a tone that turned language into architecture. I went, because Paolo was my brother. Because sometimes blood was a leash you hated and followed anyway. Because somewhere under all my anger, Dante had taught me something ugly and useful. Waiting politely for monsters to choose the hour was still letting them choose. Marco Vitelli was in the back room when I arrived. He looked less like a devil than I had hoped. Beautiful men were always disappointing that way. Dark suit, expensive watch. Smile like polished brass left in church too long. Paolo sat tied to a chair beside the guillotine cutter with blood at his mouth and terror in his eyes. "Elena," Marco said warmly. "You look exactly like your father, more inconveniently moral than is practical." I stopped 3 feet inside the room. "Let him go." "Certainly, once we discuss the book." I had not brought it. His smile sharpened. "I assumed Dante would teach you that lying only works when the other person wants to believe you." "He didn't teach me anything," I said. A soft laugh came from the shadows. Vittorio stepped forward. That hurt Paolo more than the rope. "You," my brother whispered. Vittorio did not look at him. "You should have stayed in the marble cage," he told me. "It was the safest place Dante could have put you. Safety from you, from the consequences of his softness." Marco sighed. This speech again. "I preferred him when he was merely treacherous." I looked between them. "You killed my father." Marco spread his hands. "I set a fire. Smoke makes its own choices." Something in me went very still. "Chiara didn't," I said. Marco's expression changed only slightly. "Enough, so that was the bruise, not business, pleasure." "I wondered when Dante would tell you," he said. "He used to beg so beautifully. Did you know that? On the pharmacy floor, whole room watching. I almost admired the devotion." Paolo made a choked sound. "I think I did too, but from much farther away." I had never wanted to put my hands around another human throat before. Then the door opened behind me. Dante came in like the answer to a very old threat. Black suit, black overcoat. Rosary sliding once through his fingers. Matteo and Gianni at his back. The room changed shape around him at once. Marco smiled. "And there's the grieving brother." Dante did not even look at me first. That was how frightened he was. He looked at Marco, then Vittorio, then Paolo tied to the chair. Only then did his eyes come to mine, checking in one sweep for blood, restraint, visible injury. When he saw I was untouched, the violence in him refined. "Elena," he said. My voice came out steady. "I know." Something in his face shut. Good, I thought wildly. Let him feel what secrets cost. Marco leaned against the work table. You brought the book. No, Dante said. Then she dies first. Dante's gaze slid to him. You've mistaken me for a man negotiating. Vittorio exhaled once, almost fondly. There you are, Gianni muttered. I hate it when old men flirt with homicide. Bianca's voice sounded from the front room. On my count, if anyone does anything stupid, bleed away from the paper. Marco realized too late that he had let too many people into the bindery. That was the problem with men who thought fear belonged only to them. The first shot broke the front window. The second cut Paolo's rope. Then hell arrived properly. He finally chose what kind of man to be. The fight moved through the bindery like fire with better aim. Glass, shouting, splintered shelving. A stack of folios burst loose in a storm of paper when Matteo drove one of Marco's men into the press. Gianni took a pistol across the shoulder and complained about the inconvenience while still shooting straight. Bianca dragged Paolo behind the counter and informed him with chilling calm that if he passed out before she approved it, she would revive him out of spite. Dante went for Marco. Of course he did. Vittorio went for me. That was how I knew he had always understood the true center of power better than Marco ever would. Marco wanted documents. Vittorio wanted leverage. He caught my arm and hauled me back toward the repair room, gun cold against my ribs. Don't, Dante said. He was across the room instantly, Marco half fallen behind him, blood at his mouth. Vittorio smiled at Dante over my shoulder. Now we can discuss terms. There are none. There are always terms when a man loves badly enough. The word hit the room like a struck bell. Loves. Dante's face did not change, but mine must have because Vittorio's grip tightened in satisfaction. Ah, he said near my ear. So she didn't know either. I closed my eyes once, furious at the heat that rushed into my throat in the middle of a hostage situation. Vittorio, Dante said softly, take your hand off her. No, the rosary clicked once. Then Dante did the last thing Vittorio expected. He put his gun on the floor. Every person in the room stopped. Even Marco, bleeding and propped against the wall, began to smile through his broken lip. There it was, the old fear, the old story, the terrible possibility of Dante Salvator kneeling again. He did not. He only stood there empty-handed, looking at the man who had taught him survival and now expected worship in return. You wanted proof, I learned the difference, Dante said. Here, he lifted his empty hand slightly, not surrender, choice. I will not become you to keep what I love. Vittorio's expression changed. For the first time, truly changed. He had expected rage. Blood, brutality, something easy for him to recognize as strength. Mercy offended him more. Then you are already dead, he said, and jerked me backward. I moved on instinct. My father had taught me hands, angles, pressure, the uses of small tools. The all from my apron pocket drove straight into Vittorio's wrist. He screamed. The gun fired wild into the ceiling. Dante crossed the room in the space between that sound and its echo. He hit Vittorio so hard they both went through the side table. Wood snapped. Marco lunged for Dante's dropped gun. Paolo, sobbing and furious, kicked it under the press with both tied hands still half numb. Gianni shouted, "That's my favorite useless Bellini," Bianca said. "If you die saying that, I'll deny it." Marco ran for the back room. I knew where he was going before anyone else did. "The prayer book," I shouted, not because it was there, because he thought it was. Dante looked up at me from where he had Vittorio by the collar on the floor. Our eyes met. Understanding passed cleanly. The evidence copies were already out. Marco did not know that. Dante let Vittorio go. For one critical second, he chose me over vengeance. That was all the opening Marco needed to bolt toward the alley door. Matteo took him down before he reached it. Marco crashed across the stone threshold and landed on his knees among broken paper trimmings and white ash from the old stove. Dante walked to him very slowly. Marco laughed blood into his teeth. "Go on then, make yourself what you are." Dante stood over him, terrible in his quiet. "No," he said. Marco blinked. Dante looked at Matteo. "Take him breathing." Marco's face emptied. Vittorio, still half-risen behind the wrecked table, looked far more shaken by that than by the beating, because Dante had chosen the thing neither of them respected, not weakness, judgment. He turned back to Vittorio last. The older man was sitting against the shelves now, blood at his sleeve, all his elegant false kindness gone. "I made you," he said. Dante stood over him with eyes like closed doors. "No, you taught me what to survive." Then he walked away. He did not shoot him. He left him alive to watch himself become irrelevant. That, I think, was the crueler sentence. Outside, sirens began to grow somewhere far off. Inside the bindery, my knees finally gave. Dante was there before I hit the floor. He caught me hard and carefully at once, one hand at my back, the other under my good wrist. "Look at me," he said. I did. There was blood at his collar, someone else's, a cut at his brow. Breath rougher than he wanted it. "Are you hurt?" "Only in ways that will annoy Bianca." Something desperate and exhausted crossed his face that might have been relief if relief knew how to carry a weapon. Then, there on my father's floor, among ruined paper and the men who had tried to own us both, Dante Salvator bent his head and pressed his forehead to mine like prayer had finally found a body. He told me the truth with his hands open. By morning, Marco Vitelli was finished. Not dead, finished. The documents from the prayer book reached 3 places before sunrise. A federal prosecutor Dante hated, a Bishop Marco had been blackmailing for years, and 2 rival men whose loyalty to Marco had always depended on his usefulness. By noon, the ports named in the ledgers were frozen, the clinic diversions exposed, the pharmacy authorization tied to 3 other deaths. And Marco's remaining allies were pretending they had never learned to pronounce his name. Vittorio disappeared into custody so old and silent it barely counted as prison. Dante never said where. I never asked. Some endings deserved darkness. I found him that night in the estate chapel. Of course it was the chapel. He stood alone in the front pew with his jacket off, white shirt open at the throat, black rosary slipping bead by bead through his fingers. Candlelight made the hard planes of him gentler than daylight ever did, which only proved light could also lie. I stayed in the doorway until he said, without turning, "You should be asleep. You should stop deciding what I should do." A small pause. Then, "Fair." I went to stand beside him. For a while neither of us spoke. The chapel smelled of wax and cold stone and rain coming on the night air. Somewhere outside, the cypress branches moved against one another with a dry whisper. Finally I said, "Did you mean it?" Dante looked at the altar. "Which part?" "Don't be insulting, the loving me part." His hand stopped on the beads. When he turned, there was no armor left on his face at all, not enough to hide behind. "Yes," he said, no flourish, no seduction, no cleverness, just yes. My throat tightened. "You could have died tonight," I said. "So could you." That isn't an answer. It is the only one that matters. I hated how much I understood him now, the economy of feeling. The way he cut language down when too much of it might expose the wound beneath. I stepped closer. "Try again." His gaze dropped to my mouth, then rose. "I meant," he said slowly, "that every decision I made after you walked into that room above the club stopped being entirely mine." My pulse stumbled. "I meant that when Vittorio put a gun to you, the city became negotiable." "Dante." "I meant," he said, rougher now, "that I have spent years building a world in which nothing could force me to my knees again. And then you stole a handkerchief, saved the wrong man first, and made that feel less like strength than exile." I stared at him. He exhaled once, almost angry at himself for having said it. I loved you before it was reasonable, he finished. I simply objected to the inconvenience. That did it. I laughed through the sting in my eyes, and his expression changed with a kind of startled hunger, as if he had not realized until that second how badly he needed to hear joy come from me. I touched the rosary in his hand. Chiara S., I asked. Yes. Do you still think kneeling is weakness? His gaze held mine. No, good. Then I took the beads from his fingers and set them gently on the pew behind him. His breath changed. Because, I said softly, I'm tired of being the only brave one here. And I kissed him. This time there was no hesitation at all. Dante kissed like a man who had finally chosen a side and intended never to leave it. His hands framed my face first, then found my waist, then my back, pulling me close with a reverence that somehow made the hunger in it worse. I could feel the care fighting the need and losing by degrees. My palms slid under the open line of his shirt and found warmth, muscle, the scar near his ribs I had not known about. He caught my wrist and kissed the inside of it. My knees nearly failed on principle. Elena, he said against my skin, and I had never heard my name sound more dangerous. If we remain in a chapel much longer, I'm going to disgrace several saints. I leaned in until my mouth brushed his. Then it's a good thing I restore damaged things. His laugh was quiet and wrecked and wholly worth earning. When he drew me against him again, I understood something simple and terrifying. I had fallen in love with a man built for ruin, and he was holding me as if I were the first proof that he might survive himself. Some broken things asked to be kept. Spring came late to Little Italy. By the time the air softened, the bindery had new locks, repainted windows, and fewer ghosts in the corners than before. Not none. I was not foolish enough to believe places emptied so easily. But fewer. Paolo worked downstairs now under my supervision and Bianca's threats, which turned out to be an excellent management structure. He had stopped trying to save us with secrets. I considered that progress. Matteo handled deliveries twice a week, with the solemnity of a man performing penance through book carts. Gianni came by almost daily, pretending he was in the neighborhood. Which would have been more convincing if the neighborhood had contained a single other reason for him to appear in pressed shirts, carrying black coffee for Bianca. She accepted this courtship with professional skepticism and one visible softness she thought nobody noticed. Everybody noticed, including the pigeon on the windowsill that still made Gianni swear like a dockworker. You are armed, Bianca reminded him one afternoon. It knows that, he said darkly. That's why it's mocking me. I laughed so hard I nearly misaligned a headband. And Dante learned how to enter the bindery without making it feel occupied. That more than flowers or promises or the obscene amount of silent security he tried to hide in parked cars down the block was the gesture that undid me. He would come late, loosen his tie, stand by my bench while I worked, and ask questions about paper as if materials science were a respectable avenue toward seduction. It was, unfortunately, working. One rainy evening in April, I found him in the back room turning my father's repaired prayer book very carefully beneath the lamp. You're getting better, I said. At books, at touching fragile things, he looked up. That look should have required a permit. I had a severe teacher, he said. Did she steal from you? Constantly. I went to him. The rain tapped softly at the windows. The bindery smelled warm, paste, leather, tea, damp wool from Dante's coat. He set the book aside and reached into his breast pocket. My eyebrows rose. If that is another debt notice marked paid, I will hit you with a family Bible. He almost smiled. Instead, he pulled out a white linen handkerchief. Not new, old, fine, pressed perfectly. The original was ruined, he said. This seemed optimistic. Something tender and painful moved through me. He held it out. I took it. For emergencies, I asked. For theft, he said. I laughed. You're impossible. Yes. Then, with that terrifying calm of his, he went down on one knee, My breath stopped, not because I thought he belonged there, because I knew what it cost. The room changed the way it had changed the first night, quietly, entirely, all the air narrowing around one impossible thing. Dante looked up at me with that same dangerous stillness, but there was nothing cold in it now, only choice. "Little flame," he said, his voice low enough to shake something in my ribs, "I have no respectable offer to make you." My mouth trembled. "That's honest. I can promise danger, interference, unwanted protection, arguments, a life in which your doors will always be locked better than you prefer." A pause. "And I can promise that nothing under my name will touch your work, your conscience, or you're dead without your permission again." My eyes burned. He continued, "I can promise Chiara's name will fund the clinics Marco starved. I can promise your father's name will be placed on every restoration room that work builds." His gaze held mine. "And I can promise that if you ask me for gentleness, I will never again mistake it for weakness." I think I stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of that. He reached into his pocket a second time and drew out not a diamond but a ring of dark silver set with a tiny carved onyx cross. Old, almost severe, beautiful in the way vows should be. "I don't want ownership," he said. "I want witness. Stay, leave, make me earn it for 10 years if you like. But whatever name you keep me with it." It was the most Dante thing he could possibly have said. No polished speech, no easy romance. Just devotion dressed like negotiation, because he still did not fully trust tenderness to survive plain air. I sank to my knees in front of him before he could regret anything. His hand came up to my face instantly, as if the ground beneath me still made him nervous. "Yes," I whispered. His eyes closed once, just once. When he opened them again, the gratitude in them was so naked it nearly broke me. "Yes to what?" he asked, because he was apparently determined to remain difficult at the altar of joy. "To the interference," I said. His mouth brushed mine. "To the arguments," a deeper kiss. "To making you earn it." He exhaled something almost like a laugh against my lips. "And to keeping you," I finished softly. "If you can survive being loved by someone who still believes broken things deserve careful hands." Dante rested his forehead against mine. "Little flame," he murmured, "that was the first thing I learned from you." Outside, rain moved over the city in a silver sheet. Inside, the bindery held paper, leather, vows. The soft click of black rosary beads when Dante lifted them from his pocket and wrapped them once around our joined hands. Broken things, my father had said, could sometimes be saved if you touched them gently enough. He had been right, not about everything, but enough to build a life on.